Hello, Chasers. This is an incredible interview I did with the brilliant Paul Gilbert out at his little home studio. Well, his studio facility. The facility's not at his home. And it comes in a multi-part series here, and he's talking about pedals and gear, and he's doing some amazing playing. This was also for an interactive magazine I was writing for at the time, but now it's all for you guys. So check it out, and I know you'll love this. Bye.
That's good enough.
Oh, now we're going to have fun.
Now we're going to have some fun.
Okay, you're rolling.
We're good. So Guitar Interactive is here with Mr. Paul Gilbert.
Steve Rosen, what's happening?
The redoubtable, the inimitable, the always controversial, but never trivial Mr. Paul Gilbert.
Thanks for all those adjectives.
Absolutely. We've known each other for a long time over the years, and I actually had a dream about you. True story. After we started communicating about putting this interview together, I had a dream. You had taken 2 humbucker pickups and you were carrying them around like by the cables, like they were severed heads, and you were looking for a guitar to put them in. I mean, this is true. I'm not making this up.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, this is pretty interesting, because I mean, you know, we think about your records and Fuzz Universe and the pedals and Paul Gilbert, the Soundmaster. I mean, was that always a pursuit of yours in terms of, you know, tinkering with tones and going for the ultimate sounds and changing guitars? And I mean, is that who you were, or did that kind of come later? I mean,
Let's see. Well, way back, of course, I knew nothing about guitar or gear. And I'm trying to think of the first thing that I discovered. Well, I had an acoustic guitar for 2 years, so that, I remember being, the strings were a mystery. Because I broke a string. The first string that I broke was the low E, because that was the only string that I played for 2 years. And I broke the low E, and I thought, oh, now what do I do? You know, I went down to the music store. I brought my guitar because I thought that they would have to measure to make sure they got the right length of string. And I didn't know whether it was called the 6th string or the 1st string. And I took a guess, and I guessed wrong. I called it the 1st string, and they're like, no, that's the 6th string, son. And they said, we don't have to measure. They're all long. You just cut it off. I was like, oh, you know, I learned so much in that first music store visit. And then I finally got an electric guitar, and it was a really good guitar. It was a Gibson Les Paul Custom. It was used.
wow.
It was $300 out of the, you know, the want ads in the paper. And I had saved up $150 from mowing the lawn, and my parents kicked in another $150 for Christmas. And they told me, you know, you can either have toys, like you usually have, because I was 11, you know, or you can have no toys at all, and we'll pay for half the guitar. And I'm like, I'm 11 now, I can do it. And I was really excited about the guitar, but at the same time, Christmas morning, there were no toys. And, you know, I sort of, you know, was a little sad, you know, no G.I. Joes to play with, no Erector sets or Legos. But that was really my passage into manhood. I felt, you know, wow. That, you know, this was my toy. You know, this was my, you know, I'm getting serious now. You know, I get an electric guitar. Now, I did not have an amp. So I had a cassette player that had a 1/4-inch jack for the mic inputs.
Right.
So I plugged it in there, and if you turn the input level all the way up, you'd get a really ugly kind of distortion, but it was still distortion. And so I played with that for a while, and then finally I got a Fender Vibro Champ, 6 watts.
6 watts.
And it was a pretty loud 6 watts. And I remember the lady at the music store. Actually, I got mine used, but a friend of mine had bought a new one. And when he bought his, the lady told him, don't turn it louder than 3 or it will break. And so both of us, you know, I had a used one, he had a new one, and we were both terrified, like, and 3 sounded so much better than 2. And so we're like, well, maybe we'll just try 3.5, you know, and, oh, it sounded so much better, you know. And within a week, we're both on 10, you know, and I think the first actual tweak I learned was to just bring up the humbucker close to the strings, and it got a little louder. And so we could, you know, because we're, of course, trying to get distortion. And this is, you know, the Fender Vibro Champ is a pretty clean amp by today's standards. There's no master volume or you know, preamp or gain or anything. So we're just trying every little thing. You get the pickup as close as possible. and I didn't even know that there was such a thing as pedals. And then my uncle, who's a really good guitar player, introduced me. Took me to a music store. He's like, "Oh yeah, this is something called an MXR Distortion Plus," and I never actually heard one, but the name was exciting. And then it was also, I was looking through some magazines, and DiMarzio had a Super Distortion pickup, and I remember thinking that those two pieces of gear probably did an identical thing. That the DiMarzio Super Distortion, you just immediately have nothing but fuzz all the time, and the MXR Distortion Plus, they both had distortion in the name. It turns out that the pickup just gave you more output and would drive your amp to have a subtle more amount of distortion, and where the pedal actually was much more of a radical effect.
Yeah.
And but I ended up getting a Super Distortion pickup for my guitar, and the first pedals I actually bought were an Electro Harmonix Hot Tubes,
Wow.
which was a distortion pedal, and a Screaming Tree, which was a treble booster, and that was great. It really, I thought it sounded wonderful. I remember the first thing that happened is I, of course, turned everything up to as much as it would go, and it was just, turned my guitar into a fire-breathing feedback monster, which I had no idea how to control. So I actually have a cassette of when I was 11 years old. My uncle was playing my little toy drum set I had, and we're jamming, and we're doing like, we're doing like, Give Me Shelter just over and over again. And then we would end, and first of all, I didn't know how to end, so I'd just be like, he'd do like, and I was scared to stop because I knew if I stopped, the guitar would just go, feedback, and I had no idea how to stop it. And my uncle taught me some of the greatest things in the world then. I'm 11 years old, and he says, turn your volume down on your guitar. Now, I do a lot of teaching, and this is a habit of mine now. I mean, I turn my volume down like I breathe. It's just I don't have to think about it.
Wow.
But I can always tell a guitar player that's never played loud or played in a band, because when they're done playing, they do this. It's like, no, now you're free.
Absolutely.
And whenever I, turn it on, zip, it's up, down. And it's just that has a lot to do with this instrument, because I wanted the volume to be something that I could find in the dark. It's not like in a jungle of other knobs. It's just wonk. It's the first thing I come to. And because that same Les Paul had those horrible little metal spiky things that come up and show you where what number your knob is on.
Yeah.
So I would, I'd be playing, because I was in a band, and so I'm playing, with some force. I'd come to hit that volume, and my pinky would go right into that metal thing, and there'd be blood, and it'd be horrible. So finally, my dad and I, my dad was smarter than I was, so he could figure out how to get the knobs out, and we removed those things. We ended up putting the volume in the back, and ever since then, I've always rewired guitars to have the volume, where most people, they're used to it being, somewhere in the jungle of knobs, but I always have mine right on the edge, so, it's the first thing that you come to.
Interesting. So having the Fireman is kind of all your dreams put together. It's everything that you've ever wanted in a guitar.
It's the most fantastic guitar. I love this thing so much. I mean, of course, it's got that little, squirrely reversal of the knobs. That's something I like. But from having a big guitar collection, which is a wonderful thing to play with, I started to wonder why certain guitars just sounded better, regardless of pickup or.
You mean other people playing them, why they sounded better, or sounded better when you played them?
When I played them, I had, at one point had over 100 guitars, and it'd be like, why do these 5? Why do I keep going back to these? Why do they sound better? And the thing that they had in common was a thick neck joint and a pretty thick neck. And so I started experimenting with that, and I had this idea for an upside down Iceman, just because I always thought the Iceman was cool. Paul Stanley played one, Rick Nielsen played one, and growing up in the '70s, those were two of my, I love those, Kiss and Cheap Trick. So, but I wanted to make the guitar my own, to do something that had my own signature. So I had the idea of flipping it upside down, putting a cutaway so I could get up here, and just having a thicker neck on it. Mm-hmm. Now the Iceman is also a a 24 and 3/4 scale guitar, so it's a little bit shorter than like the RGs and the PGMs and the gems. Those are more of a Strat scale. So I could use thicker strings. I could throw a set of 10s in there and still be able to bend it pretty easily. And a thicker neck, and of course, I always like high frets. But I started going for frets that are not only high but a little skinnier, because it seemed like it was better for the intonation, and also because the scale is shorter, I just had more room for my finger when I got to the higher frets. There was a little more fret room. And then right around that time, I had gone to see Frank Marino, who was one of my biggest childhood guitar heroes.
Great guitar player.
And I was watching him. It was a recent show in 2000 something, and he just had the best tone. And he was playing a weird guitar. He had a Gibson SG with 3 single coils, which is not something that you really ever see. He had Strat pickups and on a Gibson. But man, the tone he was getting was just unbelievable. And his bridge pickup was angled backwards. I could tell what he was doing. He wanted to get a Hendrix sound, because Hendrix was left-handed, so he had that Strat angle.
Right.
But it was sort of reversed because he had the guitar upside down. And that's what Frank did. And Frank's a right-handed player, but he had it angled back. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, that's kind of a good idea, because you might want more definition out of the low strings, but the high strings on a Strat, they can really take your head off.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was wanting to kind of warm up and thicken up the high strings. They were bitey enough. If anything, I wanted to warm them up and give them some more beef. So when I was doing my Photoshop experiment, I tried that one had single coils, because I was trying to get the tone of Frank Marino. And I did it to 1 in Photoshop, and I thought, man, it would look cool to do the other ones like that. And so that's where the angle came from.
Interesting.
And then, the newer models have humbuckers, but, with a single in the middle. But I still, use the zebra pickup to kind of camouflage that in the black pickguard, so it still has the look of the 3 single coils. And of course, it's got it's wired up, so you can still get that kind of, Stratty. You can still get a little bit of the twang out of it.
Yeah.
And of course, it's a lockdown bridge, and most of the time that's just easier for me to deal with. I don't knock my hand in it. Sometimes I get a bruise from a whammy bar.
You do?
Because I play hard. I'm a rock and roll player. So when I'm sitting there, especially when I do a lot of muting on the high string, and if I'm muting there, I've got my hand right next to where the whammy is, and I'll start bonking against it and get a bruise on my finger. That's no fun. So I'll do that. And actually, this is, again, it's really down to the detail. I like dots. Some guitars have like the complicated things going on there. It might look good at the store, but lately I've been getting into more adult notes on the guitar, and so I got to know where to put my fingers. And if there's complicated things going on, if there's a dragon or something, or even the what do you call them, the square rectangles. Sometimes those throw me off, because I just want to see. I need the dots, but I need simple dots. And let's see, anything else? I think, to me, the pickguard I designed, I thought it was cool to have sort of a, this point here, this sort of a symmetry thing. And it just looks like a big electric brontosaurus to me.
It does. It's
and I'm into dinosaurs lately. I've got a stegosaurus on my pick.
Stegosaurus.
Correctly spelled. And I've got an electric brontosaurus. And actually, this upper part really balances well when you stand up with the guitar. The more, and any, it's just where the strap bolt is located. If you play a Flying V or one of those guitars where the strap bolt's further back this way, you're just in for problems. The things get Actually, I don't know if V's do it so much, but a lot of guitars that are like that, they tend to be neck heavy.
I know
exactly.
And
this is just beautiful standing up or sitting down. It feels good as well.
Interesting. You bring up an interesting point, Paul. You talk about grown-up notes. We were talking earlier about you sort of been checking out the blues recently. You always felt that maybe your blues playing was a little...
I got angry at myself. Because the thing that was my comfort zone for the longest time was I'd learn a scale and, map it out on the neck. And I had spent enough time as a teenager sort of, copying eruption and Spanish Fly, and I had a lot of facility with that 3-note per string kind of. I could sort of burn through stuff. So when I went to GIT, I learned a bunch of new scales and substitutions. You could take, like, if you're playing an A7 in a blues, I could take the natural minor scale that I knew really well, the shape, and you'd move it up a whole step, and suddenly it would be Mixolydian. And as long as I didn't emphasize anything, it would be okay. Now, that's the important thing, is like, when you play fast, it allows you to not emphasize anything.
Interesting.
Because you just go, and as long as the last note's okay, all the others, I mean, they're the right notes.
Right.
But the thing that I've learned is, as you slow down, some of the notes start to become more important than the others. It becomes less democratic, and it's more like this note. When you land on something, it's like, that one I really mean. The rest of them, they're on the way there. But even if you throw in a couple bad ones, nobody's going to notice. But when you go, then those matter more. And in a way, you really have to know what you're doing a lot more. Because to me, like the 7-note scales that I used for the longest time, that's too many notes to emphasize. I mean, you can use some on the way, but when you want to emphasize ones, you've got to be more. You've got to pick them out. You got to decide. You got to choose your favorites. Mm-hmm. You got to make a greatest hits of the notes. and so that I could do pretty well with if it's only one chord. Because I spent a lot of time playing Stranglehold as a kid. So if I'm doing, I can find the good ones there. If I do, I know where to end for Stranglehold. But a blues has changes. You get your one chord. And even I've come to realize that the one chord is a completely different thing than I thought it was. I thought, if you're being a guitar player, everybody knows the minor pentatonic scale, And, certain blues songs would work. If you're doing like Born in a Bad Sign, that's kind of minor. So if you're doing, it's got a minor third, so you can get away with it. Or a lot of the Led Zeppelin stuff, it's more minor, So you can get away with it. AC/DC, so a lot of stuff I grew up, really the minor worked. But as I started listening to B.B. King and, who did I listen to a lot? Magic Sam, and getting into the old gospel stuff and jazz players that played blues, sax and clarinet guys, I realized that their one chord they're really putting a lot more emphasis on the major third than I was. It's not just inferred with a little bend towards it. It's really played. And so I started to, first of all, just try to know that and find it. I mean, the guys like Neil Schon are masters of just bending right to. Because Journey had a lot of major key songs, so he'll do that. And really hit the major dead on. That's no longer. It's more like. And this is one of my favorite licks, where you start on the major third, and you just go up chromatically. And then you end with a minor, bend it back to the major, and hit your root. So that's a beautiful lick. So the other thing I started realizing is it's not just the third, it's also, it's a lot of like avoiding notes that your hand is used to because they don't fit the sound. So the one note that every guitar player, including me, we hit is the minor seventh. And if you want to play major, you got to play the major sixth instead. So instead of going, you go. And that's not bad up here in the first note because it's an easy stretch for the fingers. In fact, it's actually easier than the stretch for the minor. So that's a nice one. Until you get down to the middle octave, like that right here. there you gotta get that big stretch, and it's kind of in a place where you don't really want it to be. So to me, I really had to work on fingerings that allowed me to get that major sound. Oh, sorry. And that sucked because but anyway. It's much more major blues than it is minor blues, on purpose. Not just by accident, but and also to do it in a swing feel, because a lot of the blues has that swing.
Yeah.
So you're going. And that's much more what was going on in the 40s, maybe. I mean, I'm not an expert on it, but when I listen back, that's pre-rock and roll. When Chuck Berry came out and sort of straightened everything out, it's not swinging anymore. I mean, I love Chuck Berry. That's where AC/DC came from.
Absolutely.
And certainly pre-1985, there were a lot of rock bands that were great at swing. Van Halen is a master of swing stuff. You're doing totally swing with full bow. Or Hot for Teacher, that's all. Really swinging, but at a certain point, maybe it came from surf music, because surf was like real, it was real straight, kind of.
Yeah.
The torso's not moving for that music.
Exactly.
I love that too, or like the Ventures kind of. I don't really know Ventures songs, but I was like. It's just more. It's more square.
Interesting. So as you're learning, as you're combining the blues thing with what you were doing, is it also addressing the tones? Is it also addressing the pick attack and the settings on the Marshalls and different?
Well, the biggest challenge is being able to stop, which is the same challenge I had when I was 11 years old. Can you stop? And before I would solve it with fast volume control work. But now, if I've got a solo and I want to stop, I might actually consider turning the distortion to the point where I can even leave the volume up, as crazy as that sounds.
Wow.
And the level we're at now in this room, it's not a realistic volume level.
No.
This is, you got to be drum set level to really get it working. But that's the thing. The gear and the settings that I'll use for playing with a drummer, it's like a whole different world than sitting around, playing in your bedroom. And that's a lot of what's in my hands has come from that, because I spent an enormous amount of time playing with drummers when I was a kid. But now I think the difference is, to turn it back enough where I can go. Because it's so much fun doing a lick that stops like that. And to have that little breath in there.
That's incredible. So
I could never do that before. Like the Racer X days, it'd be just be screaming, howling.
So that's the whole trick. Not that to trick, but be able to play that at stage volume and have that control.
Yeah. And then I've got enough fuzz pedals where if I suddenly need to, do something that requires the distortion, and that would be, a big part of my playing is using hammer-ons and pull-offs in conjunction with picking to get fast stuff. So if I want to do, it's not all picked, and to make the hammer-ons and pull-offs as loud as the pick note, so it comes across, distortion really helps for that. I mean, I've tried to get my left hand strong as well, with a clean sound. Let's get a nice clean sound. And it still comes out, but it's not working like it did with all the distortion. So for that, I've got a pedal, and I'm not going to stop while that's happening. So that's the nice thing about having more than one distortion pedal.
Interesting, because we actually talked a while ago, in fact, for the Fuzz Universe record, and you actually said to me, I want to achieve a balance between clarity and excitement. Having a lot of distortion or fuzz adds a lot of harmonic excitement to the sound, but I have to play very accurately or the string noise will become a mess. So this has obviously been a prevailing philosophy of yours from the get-go.
Well, on the, for example, the online school that I've been teaching at for the last 3 years has allowed me to really listen to, up-and-coming rock guitar players. And, I've given thousands of lessons. And if I've learned anything from it as a teacher, it's been that the challenge of rock guitar is to play one note and control the other 5 strings. And a lot of it is in the left hand. Being able to use your thumb to mute, and I, if I had a slogan, that I could put on a T-shirt, it would be everything cool that happens on guitar happens because of the thumb hanging over the top. I'm sorry, the modern generation of guitar players that have the guitar up high and are playing like this, no, it's maybe it's good, but it's not rock and roll, And growing up with rock and listening to everything from when I was a kid, I listened to Chuck Berry, I listened to the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and the Kinks, and even though the thumb's not over for that, but
Right.
Eddie Van Halen did. So so much. I mean, with lead guitar playing, actually for rhythms it's okay. If you need to play this chord, you can't really have your thumb over the top for that one. But if you want to go, you got to have your thumb over the top for that. Otherwise, it just turns into. Oh.
You're right.
So the thumb is so important. The fingertips, your finger does 3 things. It plays a note. It mutes the adjacent string above it with the fingertip, so it touches that. And man, I've seen so many players that they play like they're scared of the other strings, and it's just they should be, because then they're going to ring out. But you use the tip of the finger to mute that out, and you use the underneath of the finger to mute those out. So you can hit everything. I'm hitting all 6 strings, and only one is coming out. And that's what you learn from being in a loud band since you were 11 years old and going like, why is my guitar going? I developed those things intuitively. I never knew it until I was watching students and going like, why are they getting all that string noise? And I'd be like, oh, I need to bring their, I'd watch them, I'd watch me, and then finally I figured out those things. So if you're a young starting out guitar player or a noisy guitar player that's been playing a while, you've just you just got your $5 worth.
Interesting. So, I mean, what was the reason for wanting to do the online rock guitar school?
It's fun. I never really set out to be a teacher, but teaching has just like stuck to me like Velcro. Ever since I was a kid, people always came up to me and asked for guitar lessons. And I remember when I went to MI, I moved out to California from the little town in Pennsylvania, and I thought, man, I got to stay out here. The scene is here. I really got to stay. And I wasn't in a band that was making any money yet, so I thought I'll ask to see if they'll let me teach at GIT after I'd graduated. And before I could ask, they asked me.
Wow.
And the instructional video people came. We'll give you an advance if you do it. Well, okay. And this school again, they contacted me, and at first I was like, oh, I don't know. I want to be a rock star. I'm not a teacher, but I really enjoy it, and it's really inspiring. It allows me again to see so many guitar players of different levels, and I absolutely learn as much from the beginners as I do from the advanced guys, and they challenge me too. Sometimes the advanced guys will send something in and it'll be like, I don't know what to do there, and I got to research. And I'm always, just it really makes me know myself, because again, a lot of times I have to figure out like they're playing the right note, they're playing the right rhythm, but it still doesn't sound right, and I got to figure out why that is and help them with it.
I mean, do you come across some really good guitar players?
Absolutely.
I mean, like shockingly good guys. I mean, guys with the character and guys who might be able to go on and
yeah,
do their own
sure.
thing. Yeah, that's great.
And although I must admit that a lot of times my favorites are the beginners, because they improve so quickly. You know, if you get an advanced guy, even if you show them a lot of stuff, they got their thing together. You know, they're just, you know, adding on vocabulary to a language they can already speak.
Right.
But it's really nice to be able to steer somebody away from all the horrible mistakes that I went through. You know, like we were talking earlier, the first 2 years I played guitar, I only played upstrokes on one string. And in a way that was great, because I got really good at upstrokes, and I got really knowledgeable about the one string. And man, my second finger, which was the only finger I used, I had a lot of dexterity with that finger. And it's nice to start from a place of strength, even though it was primitive. You know, I was at a professional level at 11 years old with one finger, upstrokes, and one string. You know, I don't think there's anybody who could, you know, match me at that weird little niche of guitar.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there are a lot of people that did downstrokes better than I did and used the other fingers, and I didn't know what a chord was, but I had one thing down really well. And to have that feeling of like being able to play something simple really well, that's a hard mental thing for I think any musician to do, because we all want to show off what we can do. We want to look at this complicated thing. I remember when I first started studying Japanese, I thought, you know, I want to learn like a really complicated paragraph so I can just blow people away. You know, I want to understand what I'm saying. And so as a teacher, that's a really big challenge, because everybody, just about, you know, they want to show like, look at this complicated thing I learned. You know, I learned a Dream Theater song. And it's like, man, how about Louie Louie? You know, let's play Louie Louie. Let's play it so we can do it with our eyes closed, our foot stomping, you know, with any kind of tone. Let's get that thing down, you know, and then we'll move on, you know, maybe we'll do Paperback Writer. You know, we'll get that down so we can just play it without thinking about it, you know, roll out of bed and, you know, or a bend, you know, we want to be able to not even worry about it. Just enjoy it and not have to, like, you know, well, wait, you know, take 17. You know, is that it? You know, no, you got to get it in your ears. And then, you know, we'll get to the Dream Theater song, you know, but, you know, I'd much rather have a good hamburger than a bad lobster.
Gotcha. I copied down some of the names of some of the fundamentals that you teach.
Yeah.
So could we maybe go through a few of these and just have you kind of show us a few of these things real quickly?
Well, sure, but you know, if it's like patented school stuff, I can't give away the specifics. But let me know what your idea is.
I mean, the first, it's just strumming accuracy, which is kind of what you've talked about before.
Well, strumming is something I wish more people would do, for no other reason than it's fun. I mean, I remember to me, after playing only upstrokes for 2 years, on one string, when I first learned a chord, I think the first song I learned was Rocky Raccoon of the Beatles. And it sounded like the record, which blew me away, because nothing I did before that sounded like the record. Everything sounded like a lame version of sort of the record.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I'm playing, you know, was it You Say You Will. I'm playing Beatles songs, and they sound like the recording, which was the most exciting thing in the world. I loved chords, and the first band I was in, I was 11 years old. And I'm playing, you know, Rain When the Rain Comes. Now, the funny thing is, after teaching guitar for 3 years in the online school, I realized that I play the G chord completely wrong.
No kidding.
It sounds good. You know, I make a good sounding G chord. But look at this crazy thing. I use my pinky for the top two notes and my third finger for the bottom note. And here's something everybody does, but nobody realizes. Nobody who plays a good G chord plays the B. We mute it out. It sounds better if it's not there. Even though it's a correct note, it sounds better without that thing, because it just clouds it up. It's like having the third, that low on the voicing. It's no good.
Yeah.
And so, and I got that from Rocky Raccoon, because the Rocky Raccoon had the G7 with this finger here. So when I learned the real G, I just did that, and then I found it sounded better with the D in there. And I didn't even know I wasn't playing the B until I heard people doing it. It's like, something sounds wrong. Like, oh, mute that thing out. It's not being played. And there's like 3 other G chords you can do this. thumb and the first finger. This is the one everybody else does, or you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
even bar the third finger. So
Interesting.
I actually dread teaching the G chord because it's so complicated. Because I really feel like everybody should know the options. It's like, I'm so sorry that this is going to be more complicated than it should be. But there's and of course then there's the bar chord, the power chord.
Interesting.
But that's the art.
Absolutely. So strumming accuracy really is just a function of playing a lot of rhythm guitar. I just think a lot of guitar players tend to overlook that part of it.
Well, the other thing with strumming is of course that's the chord. I got off the subject, but strumming is being able to have a good rhythm, and just that having that up and down like a drummer has right and left, and to be able to feel where your syncopations are. If you have what would be an example? If you get your foot going on the downbeat and you listen to where those chords are, up. If I'm doing right, left, it'd be all lefts. Left, 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 which is the same thing if you go down, down, up, 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 up. Now that's slow enough. There's a lot of space there. You're not playing like shred.
Yeah.
So there's enough space where that will work. But you're not going to feel it the same way as if you had that rhythmic grid. If you watch Keith Richards, he's going to have this going the whole time. So he's not going like. You just don't feel it. When your body is moving like this. Then the groove is there, and so much of it is about the foot stomp and the shoulders and the head. And when you see a guitar player is playing like this, it's just like, oh, I gotta help you. It's music. Let me see. What should we do?
We talked before. About stretches. You are blessed with ridiculously large hands. I've seen a few people with hands like that. Eddie Van Halen has remarkable hands. Steve Vai has unbelievable hands, and Jeff Beck has amazing hands. Yeah. So there's obviously something to be said about big hands.
I think when people think about what you can do with big hands, they think this way.
Yeah.
Which is nice. You can hit that thing I did before. That would be hard to do if I had to do that in F down here. It's not going to fly. So, and of course, the way the guitar is laid out, the frets get closer together as you get higher. So, a lick that I do in E, somebody with smaller hands might be able to do it in G. So it's not like all off limits. Or you can buy a Fender Mustang, or an Ibanez Micro. If that's they make guitars that are closer together.
Yeah.
To me, the really important thing about the hand size and the guitar neck size is not this way, but this way. Because everything cool that happens on guitar happens with the thumb hanging over the neck. Being able to mute. Without having to go, be careful. That's all happening from muting.
Yeah.
And the vibrato, and having the thumb there. And when you see even you see somebody like Paul McCartney, who's not considered to be a technical player, when he's playing his G chord. He's a master thumb muter, because you don't want those bottom two notes. So, pull up, we can work it out, and you'll see some amazing thumb muting from Paul McCartney and all those guys. You look at the old John Lennon stuff, or Pete Townsend. And I've got a student who's the perfect storm of small hands. She's 10 years old. It's a girl, and she's Japanese. I've met her. She's about this tall. And she absolutely has a fantastic sense of music. She's an amazing player. She's all over YouTube. She does like Racer X songs and Guthrie Govan songs.
Wow.
She rips. But me as her teacher, it really, the main thing I want is for her to get her thumb over the neck. and she just can't do it yet because her hands are so small. And so I'm finding things for her to work on in the meantime, because she's going to grow. When she's 12, it's not going to be an issue. She'll grow. She'll sprout up, and suddenly her thumb will be over the neck.
Yeah.
And her ear is good enough where she makes stuff work. Like I gave her that, Lenny Kravitz, which to me just you got to have the thumb, and she managed to do it like that. Mm-hmm. But I'm just trying every way. Last, I'm giving her all these songs that have thumb chords, and she's managing to do a major seventh that way instead of this way, and again she's absolutely great, and she always squeezes the sound out of the guitar, which is really the important thing. But it just made me realize how at least to the kind of guitar playing I like, man, that thumb's got to be over the top. And having big hands is helpful to do that. And to me, that's much more significant than stretching stuff.
Interesting. You bring up Racer X. I mean, back in the day, Paul, was the thumb over the top for the Racer X stuff?
Absolutely. I mean, there are exceptions. I mean, if you play what do you call it, a bar chord,
right.
You can't do that.
Right. No, of course.
And I remember that there was a lick. Again, certain things where you've got a bar. I'd figured out the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway by Genesis. The keyboard part was like. I forgot it now, but just this lick up by itself.
Yeah.
There was no way I could play that and not bar, and so that would just be painful. And there's certain things that are just such a big stretch. I keep playing that lick. What make you do major? For that, I mean, it's actually still kind of up there. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But if I tried to do Ice Cream Man or something, what is the? I haven't played that since I was 12, but the the thumb was kind of there. It's as up as you can have it. There's certain things where you have to stretch out or bar where you can't, but for the most part, 98% of the time, I've got that thumb hanging over. And you can get notes too, obviously. You can get, or things with where you actually, if I play a Beach Boys song, I may not always love you, as long as there are stars above you. You never need to doubt it. I'll make you so sure about it. God only knows. So, whether it's metal or whether it's pop, gotta have the thumb. Or whether you're just imitating the Fonz going, hey!
Were you really playing the Van Halen songs when you were 11 and 12?
I got the first record when I was 11. And I had seen my uncle do the Russian. So, it wasn't a mystery. Like everybody else, when that came out, they're like, "Oh my God, is it a keyboard? What is that?" And my uncle had gotten the record first before I did, and so when I heard this, I was like, "Oh, that's not the thing my uncle was doing." And so there was that, and I remember actually I quit my first band because the drummer couldn't hear the tom-tom fill at the beginning of DOA, which is that. Boom, 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 boom. And I didn't know enough music terminology to explain it because it's on the syncopated beat, the 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And he kept hitting it on the downbeats. And I was like, I got to get out of this band. I can't take this. You got to get the Alex Van Halen part right.
Was Yngwie one of your early guys too?
Well, later on, I heard Yngwie. The first time I heard him was over the phone because by that time I had been sending demos to Mike Varney, and Mike was famous. Everybody who knew him from that period, he'd always call you up and go, "Well, your demo's pretty good, but check out this guy," and then he'd play us, Sean Lane or Yngwie or Tony McAlpine or whoever, what new discovery he had. So I was probably 17 or 18 when he played Yngwie. You know, he just got in the demo. He played it to him with a phone.
I see.
And the thing it made me want to do was learn how to do the real fast picking stuff on the higher strings. And I remember hearing, you know, fusion guitar players like Al Di Meola play that, but I didn't really like fusion at that time. So I thought, yeah, I don't like the music. So it didn't, you know, I didn't really get into it. But when I heard Yngwie doing it in rock, I thought it was pretty cool, and I worked on that a lot. But it's funny, as I've analyzed Yngwie's pick, I mean, he's an amazing picker, but he does, in a way, what I do, which is a lot of people think we pick everything, but we don't. You know, we
pull off.
It's a balance between the two hands. There, you know, Yngwie absolutely has a killer left hand, and you know, there's some stuff where he picks everything. There's some stuff where I pick everything, but it's not like. Well, I remember the funny thing was just hanging out with guitar players as a teenager. You know, everybody was very opinionated back then.
Yeah.
And you know, if the kid would be like, "Well, Al Di Meola